to the point where now, I mean, we got a pope that brought a South American idol into the church to worship.
Really?
He did. The Pachamama. He brought the South American, and he got...
I don't know what that is.
It's kind of like a...
Ethiopia did not lose the memory. Everyone else did. While Rome debated creeds and councils voted on which books belonged in the Bible, a civilization in the Horn of Africa kept reading texts that the rest of the world had quietly buried, not hidden in caves, not smuggled by rebels, kept openly, in churches, in chants, in the mouths of priests who memorized them across generations. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church holds the oldest, continuous Christian tradition on earth. Its canon contains 81 books. The Western Protestant Bible holds 66. The Catholic Bible holds 73. That gap is not a mistake. That gap is where the story lives. Inside that wider canon sits the Book of Enoch, a text so ancient that fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, copied and preserved by Jewish scribes centuries before the birth of Jesus. The New Testament letter of Jude quotes it directly. The early church fathers read it, then, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th century, the Western Church let it go. Ethiopia never did. Also inside that canon sits the Book of Jubilees, a retelling of Genesis and Exodus that fills in timelines, names angels, and maps the structure of sacred history with a precision that the Standard Bible does not. And there are others. Texts that Western Christianity classified as secondary, apocryphal, or simply inconvenient. Hi viewers, before we go any further, drop a comment below and tell us, did you even know the Ethiopian Bible existed before today? Now, here is where the story shifts. In January 2024, filmmaker Mel Gibson sat across from Joe Rogan on one of the most watched podcasts on the planet. Gibson was not talking about movie budgets. He was talking about a sequel to The Passion of the Christ, a film he described as covering events that happened between the crucifixion and the resurrection. And the details he outlined were not simple. He spoke of the fall of angels. He spoke of the realm of the dead. He spoke of a war fought in dimensions that no camera had ever tried to capture. Gibson did not mention Ethiopia by name, but what he described, the cosmic scope of Christ's death and resurrection, matched exactly what the Ethiopian biblical tradition had preserved for over 1,500 years. That is the question this documentary exists to answer. Not whether Gibson is right or wrong. Not whether the Ethiopian Bible is superior or inferior.
When we think of spiritual things, we think of a poof. Everything's got to be a poof. Well, Jesus, comes walking into the room with the door closed, and then he sits down and he eats, and he says, "Handle me and see that I'm flesh and blood," and then he disappears. Okay, so what is that?
The question is this: what does it mean that a filmmaker trying to tell the full story of the resurrection found himself reaching toward the same ancient texts that one African church never stopped reading? Something was preserved in Ethiopia that the rest of the world forgot existed. And what was forgotten may change everything you think you know about what Jesus actually did between the cross and the empty tomb. Open Genesis 6. Read it slowly. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. That is it. That is all the Standard Bible gives. 2 verses. No explanation of who the sons of God were. No explanation of what the Nephilim became. No explanation of what happened to them or why it mattered to the story of humanity. For centuries, Western theologians have argued over those 2 verses. Some said the sons of God were righteous men from the line of Seth. Some said they were fallen angelic beings. The debate produced footnotes. It produced theological positions. What it did not produce was an answer. The Book of Enoch produces an answer. According to the Enochic tradition, preserved in full only in the Ethiopian canon, 200 angelic beings, called Watchers, descended to a mountain called Hermon. They made a pact. They descended deliberately. They took human women. They produced offspring of enormous power and appetite. Those offspring are the Nephilim. The Watchers who fathered them were bound and condemned. The knowledge they transmitted to humanity, metalworking, sorcery, the art of war, corrupted the earth so thoroughly that the flood became, in this tradition, not just a judgment on human sin, but a cosmic response to a spiritual invasion. This is not mythology invented in Ethiopia. Fragments of this text in Hebrew and Aramaic were found in Cave 4 at Qumran among the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947. Scholars at the time were shaken. The Book of Enoch had not been lost. It had been sitting in the Ethiopian highlands the entire time, untouched and complete. The Genesis account calls the Nephilim mighty men of old, men of renown. It also says they were there afterward, meaning after the flood. Which raises a question the standard canon never resolves. If the Watchers were bound,
temples and stuff at that time. And then the story was born from there. And of course, then we read the book by Jared Diamond, Collapse. I read the Mayan Bible, the Popol Vuh, and, tried to delve into what they believed. And
if their offspring were destroyed in the flood, why does the text say the Nephilim appeared again? That question has an answer. But the answer requires going deeper into a tradition that Western Christianity spent over 1,000 years stepping away from. The man who saw all of this, who walked through the consequences of the Watchers' descent and documented what came next, was not a prophet most churches talk about on Sunday mornings. His name was Enoch, and what he witnessed should not have survived. He walked with God. Then he was gone. Genesis 5:24 gives 8 words to one of the most extraordinary figures in the entire biblical record. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more because God took him. No burial, no death, just gone, taken. Every other patriarch in that chapter gets a birth year, a lifespan, and a death. Enoch gets a disappearance. The New Testament does not ignore this. The letter of Jude, canonical in every major Christian tradition on earth, quotes the Book of Enoch by name. Jude 14 and 15 read, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone. That is not a vague reference. That is a direct citation of a specific passage in the Book of Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9. Jude, a book that sits inside every Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox Bible, treats Enoch as a legitimate prophetic voice. The question that creates is immediate. If Enoch's prophecy is worth quoting in the New Testament, why is the book that contains it excluded from the Western canon? The Book of Enoch describes what Enoch saw when God took him. He was carried through layers of heaven. He saw the throne room. He saw the bound watchers, the fallen angelic beings from Genesis 6 waiting for their final judgment. He saw the realm of the dead, compartmentalized by righteousness and guilt. He recorded angelic names, cosmic geography, and the structure of divine judgment in a level of detail that the standard biblical text never attempts. Early church fathers read this text. Tertullian, writing in the 2nd century, defended its authority directly. He argued that because Jude quoted it, it deserved canonical standing. Origen read it. Clement of Alexandria knew it. The document circulated in the early church as a serious theological resource. Then the councils came. Texts were weighed, debated, and chosen. The Book of Enoch did not make the final list for the Western Church. No council issued an official statement declaring it false. It was simply set aside. Ethiopia did not set it aside. And because Ethiopia did not, the complete and ancient text survived. Every word Enoch wrote about the Watchers, about Sheol, about the judgment waiting at the end of all things preserved in Ge'ez, copied by hand across 15 centuries. What Enoch describes seeing inside the realm of the dead is exactly where the next chapter begins. The cross was not the end of what happened on Good Friday. 1 Peter 3:18-20 states it plainly, Christ was put to death in the body but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah. Imprisoned spirits, disobedient long ago. In the days of Noah, Those three phrases connect directly, without interpretation, without theological gymnastics, to the watchers of Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch. The spirits imprisoned were not human souls. They were the angelic beings who broke covenant, descended to earth, and produced the Nephilim. Peter is describing a specific event. Jesus, between his death and resurrection, descended into the realm where those beings were being held and made a proclamation to them. Not a rescue, a declaration. The Greek word used for proclamation in this passage is ekerixen, from keriso, which means to herald, to announce, to declare with authority. It is the word used when a king sends a messenger to announce that a battle is over and he has won. Christ did not descend to Sheol to offer salvation to fallen angels.
Yeah. And of course, there's your own thing that comes into it from having read the book a few times. You read the book a few times, and it's amazing how your memory, how there's these recessive files somewhere in the background, how you can correlate this.
He descended to announce to their faces that what they had broken, he had repaired. Sheol, the Hebrew concept of the realm of the dead, was not understood in the ancient world as the simple place where bodies go. It was a structured spiritual reality. The Book of Enoch describes its geography in detail. Compartments divided by righteousness, sections where the bound watchers waited, areas where human souls rested until judgment. The Ethiopian canon preserves this picture whole. Ephesians 4-9 adds another piece. Speaking of Christ, it says, "What does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions?" Ascent requires prior descent. The resurrection was not simply a dead man walking out of a tomb. It was a being who had gone down into the deepest structure of created reality and come back up through all of it, carrying authority over every layer. Revelation 1:18 is where Jesus states this himself. "I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and Hades." Keys, plural, not one, two. Death and Hades are named separately because they were separate realities and both were now under one authority. This is the theological architecture that Mel Gibson was trying to build into a film. Not as creative invention, as scriptural geography, as the actual sequence of events that the Bible, including texts Ethiopia never stopped reading, has always described. The question is not whether this happened. The question is why so few people in the Western Church ever heard it preached. And the answer to that question starts with a book called Jubilees and a History of Silence that spans more than 1,000 years. The Book of Jubilees opens with Moses on Mount Sinai and then tells the entire story of Genesis and Exodus again from the beginning, with details the standard text does not include. It names the angels assigned to oversee each nation. It gives a precise calendar of sacred time, dividing history into periods called Jubilees, each one 49 years stretching from creation to the giving of the law. It identifies which spiritual beings were responsible for the corruption that led to the flood. It fills in gaps that Genesis leaves open with a specificity that reads less like mythology and more like a legal record. The Book of Jubilees was not written by an obscure sect. Fragments of it, 12 separate fragments, were found at Qumran among the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was read by Jews before the birth of Jesus. It was known by early Christians. The Damascus document, another text from Qumran, cites it directly as authoritative. It was, at one point, a widely circulated and seriously received piece of sacred literature. Then the Western canon closed. Jubilees was out. The reasons were not always theological. They were sometimes political. The Council of Laodicea in 363 AD produced a list of acceptable books. The councils that followed narrowed that list further. Texts that complicated the clean lines of emerging doctrine, texts that described angelic hierarchies in detail, that mapped cosmic history across timelines. The standard canon left unaddressed became inconvenient. Ethiopia was not sitting inside those council rooms. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its origins to the 4th century, when 2 Syrian missionaries, Frumentius and Adesius, brought the faith to the Aksumite Empire. But Ethiopia's connection to the Hebrew texts ran deeper and older than that moment. The tradition of reading Enoch and Jubilees was already embedded in Jewish communities in the region.
The demons kind of show up in the New Testament. There really isn't all that much said in the Old Testament about demons. But in some of this ancient Jewish literature that's incorporated and found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have some of these discussions of things like, what are the demons? Well,
The church that formed there inherited a biblical world that included these texts as a matter of course. What that means is straightforward. The Ethiopian church did not add extra books out of cultural preference. It preserved a wider canon because it never experienced the political pressures that caused the Western church to narrow The narrowing had a cost. And the question of what that cost looks like is exactly what Mel Gibson was trying to put on screen. Mel Gibson said it out loud on one of the biggest platforms on earth. And most people missed exactly what he was describing. January 2024, the Joe Rogan Experience. Gibson is talking about the sequel to The Passion of the Christ, a film he has been developing for years. He tells Rogan the story cannot be told the way a standard resurrection story gets told. It is too flat, too surface. What actually happened, Gibson says, covers territory that goes far beyond a tomb and a rolled-away stone. He describes the fall of angels. He describes the realm of the dead. He describes a confrontation in dimensions that the crucifixion scene alone cannot carry. The internet clipped it. People debated whether Gibson had gone too far, whether he was adding to Scripture, whether he was being sensational for the sake of box office numbers. But read 1 Peter again. Read Ephesians 4. Read Revelation 1:18. Read the Book of Enoch, which Jude quotes directly. Read Jubilees, fragments of which were buried with Jewish scribes at Qumran 2,000 years ago. Gibson was not inventing a wider story. He was trying to film one that the texts had always contained. The resurrection, in the full biblical and ancient canonical picture, was not a private miracle. It was a public cosmic event. Christ did not simply rise from the dead. According to 1 Peter, he descended first into the place where the imprisoned spirits were held, and he made a proclamation. According to Ephesians, the ascent required a prior descent into the lowest regions. According to Revelation, he came back holding keys. 2 keys, death and Hades, separately named because they were separately real. What Gibson understood and what his critics missed is that a film telling only the tomb scene is like telling the story of a general by showing only the victory parade. The war happened first. The descent happened first. The proclamation to bound spirits happened first. And then came the empty tomb. The Ethiopian biblical tradition had been saying this for 15 centuries, not as theology invented in isolation, as a canon that preserved the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and 1 Maccabees texts that fill in the cosmic architecture surrounding the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus in ways the Western 6/6 book canon leaves structurally incomplete. Gibson did not discover Ethiopia, but what he was reaching for, the full story, the one that requires fallen angels and Sheol and cosmic proclamation to make sense, is exactly what Ethiopia never stopped teaching. The physical evidence for that tradition does not live only in theological argument. It lives in manuscripts, in stone, in dated, verified, academically examined artifacts that have been sitting in the Ethiopian highlands for over 1,000 years, waiting for the rest of the world to look closely enough to see them. The manuscript does not ask to be believed. It simply exists. At the British Library in London, catalogued under Oriental Manuscript 485, sits a complete Ge'ez copy of the Book of Enoch. It arrived in Europe in 1773, carried by Scottish explorer James Bruce, who spent years traveling through Ethiopia and returned with 3 copies of a text that Western scholars had not seen in full for over a millennium. When Bruce presented it, European academics were skeptical. When Richard Lawrence produced the first English translation in 1821, the skepticism shifted, The text was real. It was ancient. It matched the fragments and references that had survived in Greek and Latin quotations for centuries. Then 1,947 arrived.
There's something called the Book of Enoch, and it talks about the angels that were cast out from heaven, brought down to earth, became problematic, started breeding with humans. And it was like this whole thing, which explained like the building of the pyramids.
A Bedouin shepherd near the Dead Sea found ceramic jars in a cave at Qumran. Inside those jars were scrolls, among them fragments of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic and Hebrew, dating to at least the 2nd century before Christ, not copies made in Ethiopia. Copies made in the ancient Near East by Jewish scribes before the birth of Jesus. The Ethiopian tradition was not an African invention. It was a preservation of something far older. The Ge'ez language itself is a witness. Ge'ez is a Semitic language related to Hebrew and Aramaic that stopped being a spoken daily language around the 10th century, but was maintained as the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the way Latin was maintained in the Catholic Church. Every manuscript copied in Ge'ez carries a linguistic fingerprint that ties it directly to the ancient Semitic world of the biblical text. The language did not drift. The texts copied in it did not drift. The Garima Gospels, housed at Abba Garima Monastery in northern Ethiopia, have been carbon dated to between 330 and 650 AD, making them among the oldest surviving Christian manuscripts anywhere on earth. The monastery that houses them has maintained continuous occupancy and active liturgical practice since the 6th century. Ethiopia did not discover these texts in a library. It copied them by hand, generation after generation, in a living tradition that never broke. And yet the Western world spent over 1,000 years not asking why Ethiopia kept reading what everyone else had stopped reading. That silence was not an accident. In 363 AD, church leaders gathered at the Council of Laodicea and produced something that would quietly reshape the Christian world for centuries. A list, 60 books considered acceptable for reading in churches. The Book of Enoch was not on it. The Book of Jubilees was not on it. No explanation was recorded for their absence. They were simply outside the boundary. That council was not the last. The Synod of Hippo in 393 AD and the Council of Carthage in 397 AD refined the list further. By the time those councils finished, the Western Church had a canon. Clean, bounded, manageable. The problem is what those boundaries cut off. Enoch was not excluded because it was proven false. No council issued a formal statement of condemnation against it. Athanasius of Alexandria, the same bishop whose Easter letter of 367 AD is one of the earliest documents to list the 27 books of the New Testament, did list Enoch separately as a text he considered edifying but not canonical. That is a significant distinction. Edifying means useful for spiritual growth. He was not calling it false. He was placing it outside the formal boundary. That boundary, over time, became a wall. Origen, one of the most brilliant theological minds of the early church, read Enoch. He engaged with its content seriously. He also raised concerns about certain interpretations, but he did not erase it. He argued with it. That is what serious readers do with serious texts. What happened after those councils was more gradual than dramatic. Enoch and Jubilees were not burned in a single event. They were copied less, referenced less, taught less. Entire generations of Western Christians grew up inside a biblical world that had no room for the Watchers, no room for the geography of Sheol, no room for the cosmic architecture that made the full resurrection story coherent. Meanwhile, in Aksum and Lalibela and Gondar, Ethiopian priests kept copying. The rediscovery was slow. Bruce's 1,773 manuscripts, the Qumran fragments in 1947, scholars like Isaac whose 1,983 translation of 1st Enoch for the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha series brought the full text into mainstream academic conversation in English. Each discovery reopened a door that had been quietly closed for centuries.
To really tell the story properly, you have to start with the fall of the angels, right?
Yeah.
Which is you're in another place. You're in another realm. You know, you need to go to hell. You need to go to Sheol.
So you're going to have hell?
But here's what makes the suppression story more than a historical footnote. The texts that were set aside are precisely the texts that answer the questions the standard canon leaves open. Why did the flood happen on a cosmic level? What were the imprisoned spirits Peter describes? Why does Revelation name death and Hades as two separate keys? The answers are in Enoch. They are in Jubilees. They were in Ethiopia the entire time. The question of why so few people know this leads directly to a much larger question about what those texts actually reveal when they are read together. Pull the threads together and something comes into focus that changes the entire shape of the story. Genesis 6 introduces the Nephilim and the sons of God and leaves the explanation open. The Book of Enoch closes it. Watchers, descent, Mount Hermon, judgment. The Book of Jubilees maps the timeline of that descent into sacred history and names the angelic structures involved. Jude 14 and 15 quotes Enoch directly, placing his prophetic voice inside the New Testament without hesitation. 1 Peter 3:18 through 20 describes Christ's descent to imprisoned spirits who were disobedient in the days of Noah, which is the precise moment Enoch documents in detail. Ephesians 4-9 confirms the descent before the ascent. Revelation 1:18 declares that the risen Christ holds the keys of death and Hades. These are not separate ideas. They are one continuous sequence, a story that runs from Genesis 6 through the resurrection, and the Ethiopian canon preserves every document needed to read it without gaps. The Nephilim did not vanish with the flood as a contained footnote. They represent the moment the created order was deliberately broken from within by beings who understood exactly what they were doing. The judgment that followed the binding of the Watchers, the destruction of their offspring, was cosmic in scale. And the resurrection, in this reading, was not simply the reversal of one man's death. It was the reversal of everything that breach had set in motion. Christ descending to Sheol, proclaiming to the bound Watchers, returning with the keys of death and Hades that is not poetry. That is the completion of a legal and cosmic sequence that began in Genesis 6. Revelation 5-9 describes the risen Christ as the one worthy to open the scroll and its 7 seals. The scroll contains the unfolding of history's final resolution. He is worthy because he descended, proclaimed, and returned. The authority is established by what happened between the cross and the empty tomb, not only by the cross itself. This is the architecture Mel Gibson was reaching toward. This is what the Ethiopian Church has taught within its full canon for over 1,500 years. This is what the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed was not an African invention, but an ancient Near Eastern preservation. The story was never truly hidden. It was present in Jude. It was present in Peter. It was present in Ephesians and Revelation. The texts that illuminate it most fully were simply removed from the shelf that most Western readers were handed. What remains is what this means for how the story ends. The churches of Lalibela were not built. They were carved. 11 monolithic churches cut directly into solid red volcanic rock, deep in the Ethiopian highlands, constructed in the 12th and 13th centuries under King Lalibela. Workers did not stack stone. They removed it, carving downward and inward until entire church buildings emerged from the earth itself, connected by tunnels, surrounded by trenches, roofed by the same rock they grew from. The largest, Bete Medina Alem, is believed to be the largest monolithic church on earth. Inside those walls, priests have chanted in Ge'ez for 800 years. The same liturgical language, the same canon, the same Book of Enoch, the same Book of Jubilees. Generation after generation, inside churches that the rest of the world, even the academic world, barely looked at, until UNESCO designated Lalibela a World Heritage Site in 1978. That is not a symbol, that is a fact, and the fact carries weight. The Western world spent 15 centuries building its theology on a narrowed shelf of texts, asking the questions those texts raised, and accepting the gaps those texts left open. Meanwhile, a church carved into rock in the Ethiopian highlands kept reading the documents that answered those same questions and kept singing about a resurrection that included the fall of angels, the descent into Sheol, and the proclamation to imprisoned spirits, as though none of it had ever been controversial, because for them, it never was. What Mel Gibson found, or more precisely, what Mel Gibson was reaching toward when he described a resurrection story too large for a single scene, was not a discovery. It was a recovery, a return to a reading of sacred history that had never left. That had been copied by hand, preserved in Ge'ez, chanted in stone churches, and carried across 15 centuries by a tradition that the Western world consistently underestimated. The story of what Jesus did between the cross and the empty tomb has always been in the text. 1 Peter said it, Ephesians confirmed it, Revelation declared it. The Book of Enoch documented the world it happened inside of. Ethiopia kept all of it. The real question, the one this documentary leaves open, is not what Ethiopia preserved. The real question is what it means that the rest of us are only now beginning to look. Some things survive because they are meant to be found. This may be one of them. If this documentary made you look at the resurrection differently or made you question what else may have been set aside, drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and it may be exactly what someone else needs to hear to start asking their own questions. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Every week, this channel goes deeper into ancient texts, forgotten traditions, and the controversial questions surrounding humanity's spiritual origins, from the Nephilim and the visions of Enoch to biblical archaeology and the connections between ancient civilizations that history rarely discusses openly. The next documentary is already coming, and what it uncovers may be even harder to set aside than what you just heard.